Hi everyone, this is BritSimon. So good evening to you. I wanted to cover a particularly important topic. For those of you that don't really understand this yet, this is going to be extremely important because what I'm about to explain to you could mean the difference between you getting your visa and not getting your visa. And it's very important over the next few months that you understand how your embassy is performing and whether they are building up a backlog or not. And I want to show you, I've shown a video before where I've explained how to look at a particular embassy and see whether it's backlogged or not. But I still get the questions about that, and I think people don't really understand it. And I also wanted to show it in a sort of a all embassies in a region point of view. So I've put some data together. I want to show that data and explain to you my thoughts about how we can see which embassies are already getting into backlog. Okay, so let me show you my screen and make this bigger so you can read it. Okay, so what are we looking at here? So essentially what I've done is I've taken the data from Zarthisius's data files and I loaded it into a database so that I could query it. I'm sorry, Zarthisius, I did this with SQL, so he'll tell me off, no doubt. But I wanted to see what's the highest case number for each region, for each embassy within a region. And I've done that for all 5 regions, and also taken account of how many interviews that they have scheduled. And the maximum case number that they've scheduled is one of the clues that we can use to see whether that embassy is in backlog or not. So let me show you that data and explain that data and tell you why for some of these you can see very clearly they're not backlogged, whereas other instances they are, right? So again, let's make this nice and big. Okay, so looking at this data, so this is the Africa region. Now this includes embassies which are not in the Africa region because this is about the number of interviews for the Africa region in various embassies around the world, right? And if we look at the top line, we can see in Cameroon for Yaoundé, the maximum case number that they've scheduled is 26,492. Remember, the cases are only current up to 26,500 at the moment. And so Cameroon has scheduled right up to the maximum number. That means there is no backlog in Cameroon because, and I'll show you in a moment, the difference between a backlogged embassy and a non-backlogged embassy. And I also can see that they've got 563 interviews arranged, which is a great number, right? So we can look at that and we can say, is Cameroon working well? Am I safe at Cameroon? Yes, they're working well. Yes, you're safe. And essentially it means that as soon as your number becomes current, you will get an interview at Cameroon Embassy if that's where you're scheduled, okay? Now let me look at the other end of the scale here, and we'll just take Cairo, for example. Now Cairo have a highest case number that they've scheduled for the Africa region of 10,875. Now if we look at the same data on Zarthisius's website here, we can see that if we search for Cairo, they should have 318 cases in Africa. They've scheduled 12 for AS region, 1 for EU region, for a total of 331. But 318 is the number here, right? And if we look at that, we can see that's the same number, 318. So these are Africa region cases that have been scheduled for interview. Not people, but cases, right? Now that's not a terrible number, but if we look at the data and we look at what we just saw there, we can see that they've only scheduled an interview for the first cases up to the maximum of 10,875, right? What does that mean? Why is that relevant? Well, if we look at the visa bulletin numbers, which I've got on my blog here. This is my own blog, and we're looking at the numbers here. October and November were at 10,000. Then December was 11,000, and January 22,000, and February 26,500. Right? Well, Cairo has only scheduled up until the December cutoff point, so they are a full 2 months behind, and they are fully backlogged 2 whole months. Okay. So even though they've scheduled 318 interviews in Africa, they are backlogged, and this represents a risk to anybody that is allocated there, unless Cairo start turning that round and have significantly more capacity that they're giving to cases, then they will get behind. Right now, we know that individual countries can be limited, and that affects the way that that these numbers should be thought about to an extent. But still, there are non-Egyptians at Cairo embassy, I'm certain of it, that should have been scheduled right up to 26,500, and they haven't been, and that's purely because of the backlog. Okay, so looking back at my data again, that's one example. Let me see if I can give you another example. Some other pretty horrific examples is obviously Addis Ababa and Accra, right? Two very important embassies that should be handling a lot more cases from Africa, particularly, let's say, well, particularly Addis Ababa. It's an Africa region embassy, obviously. It has a significant number of selectees, and they've only scheduled 59 selectees from Africa region to date, whereas Accra has scheduled only 60. That's after 5 months of scheduling, right? So that's clearly not enough. And if you look at the highest case number, Addis has only gone up to 1840 and Accra to 4,358. So they are massively behind. They are not only 2 months behind, but those two embassies are still in the first visa bulletin range from October. They've not even gone through the visa bulletin range for October yet. So they are a full 4.5 months behind, if you want to look at it that way. And from a scheduling point of view, unless they massively increase their capacity at those two embassies, they're going to continue to do a small amount of cases each month, and it might take them the full 12 months to get to cases in the 10 to 20,000 range. They might never get to the 25 and 30,000 range at those two embassies. So you may already be current at Accra Embassy with a case number of, let's say, 25,000, and you absolutely deserve to have your interview. But if they're only on 4,300 at the moment, and they continue to fail to meet the capacity that they need to meet, then you're not going to get your interview ever at Accra. And you're probably stuck at Accra because you're probably in AV status, which at that point you can't change to another embassy. So this is a big deal. This is a very important point for you to understand. You need to be able to look at this data and figure out whether your own embassy has a problem or not. Now, you can either look at it in the format that I'm giving you here, or you can go along and have a look at Zarthisius's page if you just want to know about your embassy in particular. But I'm going to show you the data again on the backlog report here, so that you can see the other embassies that are doing well, and maybe you've got an option to move to one of those embassies, right? So we talked about Cameroon doing good, right? But you can see all of these embassies down here, they're all doing good. Some of them are extremely good, like Algeria is up to 25,000. That's very good considering their accept country situation and so on. They've done 506 interviews. That's really good. Nairobi, as I've mentioned before, fantastic. They've done 891. scheduled interviews, or they've scheduled 891, which would be nearly 2,000 people. And they're right up to the max case number, 26409. So we couldn't expect more from Nairobi. They're not at all backlogged, and they've got plenty of interviews scheduled. All these other embassies, I would say, none of those are backlogged, because they're all able to show that they've taken cases right up to the latest feasibility. As we get below 22,000, we're starting to see some embassies that I wouldn't say are bad, like let's say Casablanca. Casablanca they've scheduled 756, but only up to 21,101, right? So you would think that they would have some case from Africa that is not limited by a country exception that would have been scheduled higher than that point. So they may have a little bit of a backlog, but not too bad, right? So I'm not worried about Casablanca. Not really worried about any of these other embassies, including Benin. They're a fairly important one at 94 cases. What other important embassies have we got? Abu Dhabi, funnily enough, are doing reasonably well. A little bit backlogged for Africa cases, but not too bad. And Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, yeah, that's not too bad either. Again, a little bit backlogged, maybe a month backlogged at Tanzania, but that's not terrible. They can catch up with that pretty easily, right? And they're not limited by an accept either, an accept country. So we'll be keeping an eye on Tanzania to see if they start to do better, but I wouldn't be panicking about them at the moment. Then as you get to some of these other embassies here, these are generally, apart from Rwanda, which also looks backlogged to me, actually, I should mark that one. Apart from that one, there's not really a lot of places which you would normally expect a high number of African cases at any of these. So the fact that they've got small numbers and relatively low case number as a maximum doesn't worry me at all at any of these embassies here, right? Rwanda is a little bit of a concern. Egypt's a concern. And DRC, yeah, that's a little concern as well. That is a little backlogged, right? So they've only got to case number 6594. So that's DRC and Kinshasa. And although they've done they've scheduled 261 interviews, they really should have scheduled more than that, and they should be on a higher case number of more than that. So they are a bit backlogged. Okay. Not worried about those. Cape Verde, Malawi, Finland, obviously New Zealand, not a problem. I am extremely worried about Accra and extremely worried about Addis Ababa. They clearly are not doing well at all. Unlike DRC, I mean, DRC at least have scheduled, 500 people? That's a little bit different to Ethiopia, that's scheduled 120 people maybe, right? Or not even that, 100 people probably. So that's, that's significant. So let's keep an eye on these. Now, that's Africa region. So I'm giving you probably 5 embassies there that are showing signs of being backlogged. The worst being Ethiopia, Ghana, DRC, and then going up the list, Egypt and Rwanda. Okay. We'll look at Asia. Asia really doesn't have such a problem at all. Their biggest problem is going to be Turkey embassy. Now, the Iranian cases, are scheduled in 3 embassies, right? Which are Abu Dhabi, Yerevan, and Ankara. Okay, that's for Iran. Now, Iran is lower on the. In fact, I need to look up the visa bulletin. They're lower on the visa bulletin, of course. So let's see how badly behind, if at all, they are. We'll just do. Let's have a look at this. Visa bulletin we've got up to date. We're going to get a new visa bulletin in the next few days, by the way, so look out for that. And I'll just come back to that visa bulletin point at the end of this conversation as well. So, okay, so for Asia is current up to 5,500. Iran is current up to 5450, right? And it was the same last month, right? Nepal is a little bit restricted at 3,000 and then 4,500 for the last 2 months. But Iran is almost at the same level as Asia as a whole, right? So as we look at the data for Iran, and these are the ones that I would be most concerned about, would be Iran and Kathmandu for Nepal. So Ankara is scheduled up to 4,098 for Asia cases in Ankara, and they've scheduled 214 cases. It's not terrible, but it is lower than I would expect at this point, right? They're probably handling cases that were current a couple of months ago. So I would like to see them doing better. And in the other two embassies that are affecting Iran, they're doing better. They're up to date. Although the number for Yerevan looks small, the high case number for Yerevan is quite high. It's almost current, right? So that kind of shows me that there isn't really a backlog situation in Yerevan, right? And there isn't a backlog for Iranians in Abu Dhabi, right? So those two are the safer bets at the moment than Turkey. Turkey is also the embassy that tends to process well up until a certain point in the year and then starts not accepting so many interviews in the latter part of the year, which is frustrating as hell, but that's how that tends to work out. Okay, and then as we look at some of these other embassies, you may be an Afghan wondering whether Islamabad is doing well. Well, they are doing well. 143 interviews scheduled in Islamabad, which would mainly be Afghan cases, I would say, and they're almost bang up to date, 5,500. They're almost at that point. So that's really good news for Afghans. So if you're an Afghan and you're choosing which embassy to move your case to, because you have the right to move your case if you're an Afghan, then Pakistan looks like a good option. It's easier to travel to than some of the other countries, of course, and you can get by there pretty easily. So that's a pretty convenient place to go. So that's probably your safest bet. Djibouti is doing okay. Now Djibouti handles cases from other regions as well, or other countries as well. So they're important. They're doing okay. They've got 112 so far, and they're right up to date with Asia. It's not too bad at all. And there's nowhere else or no one else I would be worried about. Nepal has scheduled up to 3,846. That's almost the latest current month, which is 4,500, right, for Nepal. And they scheduled 580 cases, which is about 1,000 people. And that's in the first 5 months of the year. That's fine. There's no reason to be worried about Nepal. So that's okay. Colombo, a little bit behind. I think they are probably a bit backlogged. I would say Sri Lankans, would probably agree with me that that's a little bit backlogged. So that's a little scary. And where else? Maybe a couple of others. I'm wondering about Kazakhstan. That seems a low number there. I'm surprised not seeing more from them. But this is Asia, of course. So, that's not too bad. Now, Beirut's a funny one, funnily enough. So Beirut, in the last couple of years, has been one of the bright shining stars. And I'm wondering a little bit why they're so low here. I'm not quite sure what's going on. I'm not sure if there's some sort of activity at Beirut that is causing some sort of problem, but that might be. I'm going to mark them as red to keep an eye on them to see if that's a problem as well. Okay, so that's the Asia situation. EU, the only one that I'm really worried about is Ankara. They're behind. So as an EU embassy, they should be. Let me just check the. Let me check Turkey. Yeah, no, there's no restrictions on them, right? So no restrictions. Uzbekistan is limited, Russia is limited, but the whole of EU is at 13,500, right? So there's no reason why Ankara should be limited to only 3,909. Let me make that bigger. You're not going to see it otherwise. Yeah. Right, so this is Ankara in red, 3,909. That's a low high case number considering any Turkish applicant or anyone else in Turkey at the moment could be current up to 13,500, and they've only gone to 3,909. So they are behind. They're a good couple of months behind, and they need to do more interviews. Uzbekistan isn't backlogged because although their high case number is only 4,614, they're limited as a country anyway. They've got an accept designation by them, and they've got 469 cases scheduled, which is not too bad. I would expect a reasonable performance from Uzbekistan, Tashkent over the coming months, so I'm not concerned about them. And then at the other end of the scale, like good embassies, Warsaw's doing great, 656. That's good news for the people that have been allocated to that embassy. Frankfurt is 147 cases, right up to date. Not a problem there. There's some good activity in Tirana, Bishkek, Almaty. Those are doing well, right? So Kazakhstan not doing so well on Asian cases, but doing fine on EU cases, right? And in general, what we got there, that's pretty good. A little bit behind, but nothing of these is really terribly behind until we get into the embassies, which are not in that region anyway. None of these. Well, maybe Greece. Greece might be a little bit behind, but it's a small embassy. 9 might be perfectly adequate, and it might be exactly what they need. So nothing really of concern there. Oh, and of course Egypt, but Egypt will mainly be handling African cases, right? So if you're in Europe, the only embassy to really be concerned about, as far as I'm concerned, is Ankara. Okay, and that's the same story we've had for a couple of years. Ankara has been kind of difficult for the last couple of years. Quick look at OC. Nothing bad in OC. And as we can see, Suva Embassy is doing great guns, 137 interviews already scheduled, maximum case number 872, that's fine. This is for OC region, right? Auckland's doing fine. Comparatively speaking, they've got a small number of selectees compared to Fiji or even Australia. So the fact that they've only got 9 so far is fine. And they're right up to the numbers in terms of the max case number. So no problems there. No problems at Sydney either. And then the rest of the embassies there, no big deal. They're all looking good, right? And then lastly, South America. Again, same story as OC. There's not really a concern anywhere there. Havana's doing great. I'm so happy to see Havana doing well because Cubans had a very tough time of it over the COVID years, and they've just had a tough time. Their embassy has not been working well. Obviously, it's been closed for quite some time. So it's great news that Cuba is finally doing well. Peru doing good. A lot of selectees in Peru. They're doing good. They're right up to the right number, so they're doing fine. And the rest is pretty much what I would expect. There's nothing scary or bad in South America either. Okay, so have a look at this data from the point of view of your embassy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to publish these charts on my blog so that you can go and look at this data, and I'm going to capture this point in time, and then I'm going to revisit this next month and probably the month after that, and just see whether some of these embassies that are currently backlogged are getting worse or they're getting better. We need to start seeing the capacity they're making available for DV cases. By the way, I have explained to some people before, like if we look at Africa and we look at Addis, for example, Addis Ababa, um, if you want to know why these embassies are doing so badly, what you can do is you can look at their report, and what you'll see is they're doing a lot of visa issuances in the IR visa category, which is immediate relatives of United States citizens. Um, so this will be things like a US citizen bringing their parents to America, which they're supposed to have an immediate visa available for that. There's not supposed to be a waiting time at all. There's no limitations, no numeric limitations, and they're supposed to have a visa immediately available. Same thing on a child of a US citizen, like if they're adopting a child or bringing a child in, there's supposed to be visas immediately available. A US citizen marrying a foreigner, there should be immediately available. There is a preference given to American citizens wanting to bring their family across, as opposed to green card holders wanting to bring their family across. Very big difference between those two situations, right? So, so for certain immediate relatives, what they call immediate relatives, which is the IR category, there is an absolute preference being given to those cases over DV in some embassies. So until the IR backlog is dealt with at Addis, for example, and Accra, until that backlog is cleared up, we're probably going to see DV being deprioritized as we are now. Now, the only thing I don't know is how long the IR queues at these embassies, right? And so maybe they'll get through their backlog in the next month or two and things would return to normal, maybe. But I think that that's, I don't think that's a reasonably good bet. I think that's a pretty bad bet to make. And I'm worried that they're going to continue operating the way they have. Okay, so look for the published data on my website. I'll put these charts on there now. I'll put the link to the article below the YouTube video so you can see both of those things together. And as I mentioned, we'll revisit this in a few weeks' time, and we'll look at this again over the next 2 or 3 months to make sure that you understand what's going on. What can you do about it? The last thing I'll say. What can you do about being stuck at a backlogged embassy? Well, basically, you have to move. If you want to save your chance, if you're stuck at Addis Ababa embassy and you think that you're not going to see anything better, any improvement there, then you have a simple choice to make. It may not be an easy choice, but it's a simple choice, right? The choice is stay in Ethiopia and lose your chance, or move to another country where the embassy is performing better, and let KCC know that you've moved, and they will then schedule you in the new country. But you have to have the ability to live in that country, maintain yourself, survive until your interview comes up, etc. And there is no point in doing that when you've already been moved into AV status, because KCC won't move you. So you have to make that decision early enough to benefit from that decision. And this is why I'm trying to give you all of the information, right? So this is why it's important you pay attention to this subject, because there are going to be thousands of people that will miss out because they were assigned to Accra, Addis Ababa, perhaps even Kinshasa or Cairo, and they will miss out. They will lose their opportunity, their once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They will miss out because the embassy is behaving badly. And there's nothing we can do to stop that. Okay? The only thing you can do is move to another country. Okay? And then if you want to know which country to move to, have a look at the list and say, okay, fair enough. I'm going to move to one of these countries that is doing well because I expect them to continue doing well. And then you really just, it's a matter of, do you have the finances available to you to move to that country and wait for your interview there, right? If you try and get KCC to move your case without moving, they will 9 times out of 10, they will deny your request and make it much more difficult for you to make that request in the future. So asking them to reassign you to a different embassy without moving to an area where that different embassy would be chosen is a bad thing to do. You're going to cause yourself more problems. Okay, don't do that unless you understand fully what the risk is you're taking by asking KCC to move you to another embassy. They figure out that all you're really doing is embassy shopping, and they don't support it. They want you to interview where you live, which is why I'm saying to you, if you want to be interviewed in country A, if you want to be interviewed in Cameroon, you have to move to Cameroon. That's it. That's what you need to do. You can't just email KCC and say, hey, I'm never going to be interviewed in Addis Ababa, so move my case to Cameroon and I'll travel there just for the interview. You can't do that. They won't do that. They won't accept you doing that, right? So, but if you've moved to Cameroon before you got into AV status, then you can unlock your case and you get a chance of saving your case. So that's why this is important, folks. All right. I'm hoping that's making sense to you, and I hope some of you will be able to take action on this to save your cases, because it's going to be the difference for some people, probably many thousands of people. It will be the difference between getting their visa and green card and never getting that visa or green card. Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining. Give me a thumbs up, do subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment below the videos. Let me know what you think about this situation. Okay, everybody. Thanks, then. Bye-bye.